Now, I'm not going to talk about my university days. They were at Bonn University, they were at Chicago University, they were at a French university, Aix-en-Provence, and a Belgian, Liège. So I prepared myself well, trying to at least, for my diplomatic career. Now I'm supposed to tell you something about my country's, Germany's, responsibility for promoting peace and reconciliation. We are living, as you all know, in challenging times. Peace and reconciliation are very much in demand, but difficult to obtain. Sometimes requiring measures going beyond goodwill and a readiness for dialogue, even when based on understanding of the interests of all parties involved. One has even to go further. One has sometimes to deploy sanctions, whether economic or even, as a last resort, military ones. It's a very complex effort to promote peace and reconciliation, also still in our times. When we look at Germany's position on this issue, we find a country situated in the center of the European continent, the strongest economic power in Europe, thanks to a highly developed industrial base and fairly sound economic policies pursued over the last decades. Germany is also a stable democracy with, and that's important, with functioning institutions. It has, however, to cope, as others have, with some handicaps. Ours are special to our German existence. One has to do with our history. 2 lost world wars, crimes committed during the second in the name of Germany. All that has strongly influenced the attitude of many of my countrymen. Also, neighboring countries in Europe, which have suffered from German occupation, have not forgotten. So it's not easy to pursue German interests. And concerning the balance of power in Europe, Germany remains too big to be pushed around, but at the same time, not strong enough to direct the affairs of the continent. That's maybe good for the continent, but in any case, it's a fact. So the so-called German question stays alive, always ready to be invoked by anybody having an interest in putting pressure on Germany, whether in order to obtain something or to resist particular requests from Germany. Whoever does not agree with Germany ends up criticizing it, not only by quarreling with German policies and German political demands, but also by referring more or less directly, indirectly, to its past. Be it by clumsy drawings showing Angela Merkel in a Nazi outfit, or by complaining about German attitudes of rigidity or even domination. So it's not easy to be a German in Europe. The newest thing is Germany's moral imperialism, due to its efforts to make the best out of the sudden influx of refugees, have them well treated and distributed fairly among all European countries. In order to understand this German attitude on the refugee issue, one has to remind oneself of something which has been deliberately or quite deliberately pushed to the background. Namely, after World War II, around 13 million Germans became victims of the biggest ethnic cleansing in European history, imposed by the victorious Allies. My family and I were among these victims, and we belong to the many Germans who remember how it feels to be a refugee. Today or yesterday, the word refugee was named the word of the year in Germany. That is certainly not coincidental. In apparent contradiction to all this, connected with our past, with the fact that we are rather big but not big enough and all this, in apparent contradiction to all this, other Europeans, and in particular the US, are insisting on more German leadership and on more German substantial contributions, including more burden sharing, also in military matters. So Germany has to find its way through all these contradictory demands. And as a democracy, also has to deal with its own internal disagreements. Immediately after World War II, many, if not most Germans, turned pacifist and insisted on never to rearm again. A majority of these Germans, however, were induced by the threat by Stalin's Red Army to change their mind and attitude and to give in to American pressure for rearmament. Nevertheless, a strong minority remained anti-military and continues to remain that until today. And this movement is today also exploiting anti-Americanism and as kind of wanderers between East and West, pretending to better understand Russia and, of course, also Putin. After the Second World War, European unity gained much support in Germany because it meant reconciliation between two arch enemies who over the centuries had battled each other, namely France and Germany. And this European unity was meant to make and really made war between these two arch enemies impossible. That turned out to become a realistic vision. And it explains why most Germans still today are positive on European unity. And I'm also became a convinced European. Nobody persuaded me except the facts of European life and of European history to that. However, the same Germans, years later, in the midst of the Cold War, millions of them protested vainly against this famous, for some infamous, double-track NATO decision on medium-range nuclear weapons. I still remember the cities were full with millions of protesters. The decision was nevertheless upheld, and it helped to induce the Soviet Union to negotiate on disarmament, to give up its aggressiveness, and finally to end the division of Europe. The many protesters had been well-intentioned, but extremely naive. And that is always the risk for those trying to live up to their ideals in order to make the world better. They too often forget to see the world as it really is. Today's challenges put particular pressure on Germany. Not the least because after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, beginning with the early 90s, everything looked so well for Germany. With its unification and with Central and Eastern Europe joining the EU and NATO, Germany had achieved more than it had ever dared to hope for. It saw its chance to become the stabilizing center of the continent for the first time in our history. And it imposed accordingly on itself, in the light of its history, a deliberate policy of restraint. Policy of restraint. Germany had become a kind of saturated country, had achieved what it needed to achieve. Living in freedom, stability, economic and social well-being, together with its partners and neighbors, in peace. And in the light of its turbulent history, it was a blessing, it was a miracle, it was almost too good to be true. And indeed, it became this beautiful picture, soon tarnished, to our utter surprise. We were not prepared for that. First, globalization imposed its due in form of the financial crisis, which had started in the United States and hit unprepared member states of the EU. Germany, which had done its homework of structural reforms in order to safeguard the stability of the euro system, felt compelled to insist on reform measures by those partners lacking in competitiveness. And Germany tried also to use this crisis as a catalyst for more Europe, to strengthen the European integration. And we had some success. Spain followed, Ireland, Portugal, and the Baltic countries, all successes. Relatively speaking, but nevertheless. Some even real, total successes. However, Greece resisted for all kinds of reasons, special to that country. And, that was even more important, Greece was supported by the two most important partners of ours, economically speaking and politically speaking, by France and Italy. Both these countries also faced with imbalances in their economies and with internal obstacles to overdue reforms, so no surprise. Turbulent negotiations followed. Angela Merkel, our chancellor, was deeply involved. Our finance minister, Mr. Schäuble, also. Germany could not escape its responsibilities, and finally a compromise was reached. In view of Greece's record, many Germans question the wisdom of this deal, have doubts about its durability. But in any case, it made sense to give Greece a third support package, and by that another, and hopefully not the last chance. This decision, when I come to the next challenges, was influenced not only by monetary and economic considerations. It was very much shaped by geostrategic considerations. Sounds ugly, but so. Namely, in view of Putin's aggressiveness in Ukraine and in view of the refugee crisis. The EU simply couldn't afford to have Greece turn into a European failing state. This was it. Now, the second development, proving that with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of history had not been reached, came with the rebirth of Russian imperialism by Putin's annexation of the Crimea and his indirect or hybrid invasion of eastern Ukraine. These violations of international law, including clear treaty commitments, undermined the European peace order established after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, inter alia, confirmed by the 1993 Memorandum of Budapest, signed also, of course, by the Russian Federation, which recognized the territorial integrity of Ukraine in compensation for its renunciation of nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons the Soviet Union had stored on Ukraine territory were destroyed. In a one-sided, naive way, the Ukrainians today have to regret this. If they still had these weapons, Crimea would still be Ukrainian. So you see how difficult it is to promote disarmament, nuclear disarmament, in our times. Now, though the United States had been one of the guarantors of this agreement on Ukraine, they too left it mainly to Chancellor Angela Merkel in Germany and the EU, but basically it was Angela Merkel, to prevent the Ukrainian conflict from getting out of control. We were pushed into a command position which we really didn't aspire to get in. In order to give negotiations a chance of success, Angela Merkel had to unite the West behind economic sanctions, painful sanctions, not only for Russia, also for German industry heavily involved in Russia, as far as exports and energy delivery is concerned. So these sanctions were necessary in order to induce Putin in the direction of a compromise. And a truce was agreed upon at Minsk or in Minsk. As a result of it, the conflict became frozen in the sense of leaving Ukraine vulnerable to future Russian destabilizing efforts whenever Putin considers that as useful. So the conflict stays with us. Putin's geostrategic interests are not limited to the Ukraine. He also wants Russia to be accepted as a global player on equal footing, that's the main thing, with Russia, with the United States, as an equal player. So he is now challenging the United States in the Near East by intervening militarily also in Syria. And this geopolitical power game has side effects, probably welcome by Putin. Side effects of increasing the numbers of refugees fleeing to Europe and primarily Germany, further destabilizing the EU, and at the same time weakening Western efforts, or at least European efforts, of support for Ukraine, as well as the combat against the terrorism of the Islamic State. So it's a quite fascinating power game that's going on. And in such a situation, one has to learn from history. From Hitler, from Stalin, from Milosevic and others. Authoritarian leaders need to be contained in time through adequate countermeasures in order to make their advances costly to them. Otherwise, they will simply continue and make us in the end glide into major military conflicts. Only by remaining united and by using all the options at our disposal, from diplomatic negotiations, dialogue, to economic sanctions and military deterrence, do we stand a chance of avoiding an even bigger crisis. These are lessons of history. Now, limiting the flood of refugees is a priority issue, even a question of survival for Germany. That requires more stability in the countries of origin, where these refugees come from. While with terrorists, one cannot negotiate, also not dialogue, but has to defeat them, the West is trying to bring together the major players in Syria and Iraq, including Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Doing so is complicated because a number of these players profit from the conflict. And the conflict is also a complex religious one. While on the other hand, the West has to be careful and cannot sacrifice the peoples of Syria and of Ukraine in this conflict. And the many challenges demand also from Germany stronger contributions. It has to see the world as it is and to invest more in security. Security in all its aspects. After the ruthless attacks in Paris by the terrorists, Germany has to react also as a responsible ally. It can no longer overlook the military component in the struggle against terrorism. And Germany's readiness to send its soldiers to Syria, to Iraq, Mali, and Afghanistan, one has to imagine that. Germany totally defeated in 1945. There was nothing left. It was the 0 hour of German existence. and now German soldiers in Syria, Iraq, Mali, and Afghanistan, is also intended to enhance the chances for German diplomatic efforts towards political solutions, first of all in the Near East. For example, in order to reduce the scope of the conflict and have it concentrated on fighting the so-called Islamic State. You have to bring some kind of peace to Syria. Our contacts with certain players in the region, including Russia, could hopefully be of help in this. This is in any case part of this whole equation for us Germans. We are trying to be realistic and therefore are ready to participate in military efforts, but more as a backup, that's our primary interest, as a backup for hopefully more successful diplomatic efforts. Early this week, I'm coming to a conclusion now, Time magazine picked Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel as this year's leading person of the world. We feel honored. Huh? However, the problems Germany and Europe are facing are enormous. We would prefer, instead of getting this honorary title of Person of the Year, we would get more support from the other side of the Atlantic. In the light of the challenges the West as well as the EU are facing, both are lacking in courage, solidarity, and cohesion. This is our biggest challenge now, to bring order into our own backyard. In addition, Germany has to deal with partners struggling with populist and rightist movements. Movements which stand for inward-looking and outdated nationalistic ideas. And that's not only true for France, Great Britain, and Poland, Germany's major partners in Europe. By the way, it's also starting now in Germany, which is always particularly dangerous in view of our past. But it's not only limited to Europe. One only has to listen to, I hardly dare to use his name and put it in my mouth, by Donald Trump. We are all called upon in our times to act responsibly and to stop running away from the real world. That's my message also to you. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very
If you
much,
have
sir.
questions, I'm ready.
Yes, we have questions.
Please.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very clear. I have one question. My question is that due to the economical power of Germany, don't you think that German diplomacy is not playing the role it is supposed to play in the resolution of conflict throughout our world? Meaning that German contribution to peace in the world is always seen, is always made throughout the umbrella of someone. Let's say United States, United Nations, or NATO. Thank you.
Oh, I think you are exaggerating. During my career, I worked very hard in the various conferences on the conventions of Cotonou, Lomé, and what have you, to promote economic development in Africa in particular, but also in the Caribbean and the Pacific region. And I did my very best, and this was done on behalf of the European Union or the EC in the old days. And we continue to work also through the specialized agencies of the United Nations. We, in addition, have our bilateral programs, but we prefer to have a coordinated effort, and it is quite often better to do that in the regional context of the EU and the global context of the United Nations. We could, of course, do more. One always can do more. And I think it is more important that we try to get our aid and support better coordinated. By the way, that also requires not only that, for instance, we cooperate also with other bilateral major donors like the United States, China, and so forth. We also need to have positive responses on the side of the recipients. And we are very much interested in seeing our African friends developing their own communities with, in particular in the economic field, with free trade, with giving up this idea that every tiny African state needs its own air fleet, its own harbor, etc., but much more coordination. Also, promoting investment by giving the investor coming from Europe or elsewhere a chance to have a bigger market at its disposal. For that, you need to unite, at least economically. I know you are doing it already in Africa, but from my point of view, by far not enough, and certainly not the Arab world is doing anything sufficiently. This Arab League, you can forget it. And so Africa is there already more in the forefront, but you still could do more. And because only when your own industry is capable of trading successfully in Africa, it can expect afterwards to also be positive in other parts of the world. And in particular, investors will not come when they only have, you come from Mauritania, don't you? You know, it's fascinating, Mauritania, but your market is not big enough for an investor. He will come when he knows he can cover the whole region. And so these kind of things are very important. Yes, we could do more, but look, the world is so big for us, and we are overstretched, not only militarily, we are also overstretched in other connections, or at least it's not easy for us. But we see the challenge, and we are certainly willing to do more if others join us, so that you can expect to have a bigger impact. And we believe still in putting a lot of our strength in multilateral institutions, regardless of whether one recognizes then that Germany is behind it or not. We don't need name recognition. We have already too much name recognition in the world, from our point of view. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you for this wonderful speech. It's an honor. My name is Ahmed Al-Maligi. I'm an Egyptian activist and a political analyst. Yeah? I'm an Egyptian activist.
Yes, good.
Yes, and a political analyst too.
Yes.
So the question goes, would you agree with me that, because first of all, we have to, when we look at the world, we have the United States, we have Russia, we have China, and the European Union. Agreed? And since 2011, since the revolutions and the Arab Spring or the Arab Winter or whatever the people are calling it now, would you agree with me that the European Union lost a lot of influence and ground in the Middle East and in Africa? And I think this is the way I see it, that this is one of the reasons that's why Putin is acting as Putin now. Because when you compare Putin's actions and in the past 10, 15 years, now he's going into Ukraine, and now there's a crisis in Turkey, supporting the Syrian regime. So, and the euro the currency itself is going down. So who to blame? That's the question. And if the EU lost all of this ground, all of this influence in the Middle East and in Africa since the revolutions, and with everything that's happening now, I don't see the European Union doing anything, except when they interfered in Libya by the NATO strikes and the month after Syria happened, but no one went there. So who to blame?
Well, it's probably hopeless to start a blame game here. In any case, one becomes, the risk is that, for instance, if I join you, that I become one-sided, and I would blame everybody except Germany, you know. The temptation would be there. First of all, I think that Europe has not deteriorated that much in its influence. It has not been able to take advantage of some of the chances or meet some of the challenges adequately, because we are at present in a period where we are pretty much occupied with ourselves. It has to do with the financial crisis, which has been overcome but not yet completely. We still have weaknesses. That's why, for instance, the European Central Bank is playing this rather dangerous game of easy money, which is a highly risky game, but maybe it's the best possible means at this situation, risky as it is. We have these, as I mentioned, these internal problems with our extremists on the right and on the left. This is destabilizing. France and Britain are no longer major players. And Germany still is, but we can't do it alone. And then we have the United States. You know, Putin is not exploiting European weakness. Europe, in relationship to Russia, is stronger than ever. We stopped the thing, the conflict in Ukraine. And the United States were behind, allegedly leading from behind. I tell you, that leadership is really not enough to deal with the Putin. America is the problem. Mr. Obama is the problem also. I don't want to put all the blame on him, but he has other priorities, and he's very sympathetic. And ideally speaking, I would also love, I know America very well. I've lived there in 4 decades, for 13 years. And I can tell you, I would also love to see his priorities materialized. But United States are the indispensable nation, the one and only indispensable nation. I don't need to explain that to an Egyptian. And we are in a similar situation. We are willing, by burden sharing, to take more of the whole thing on our shoulders, but we can't do it all alone. And so we have a problem. Putin, I still have my doubts whether what he's doing is really showing how strong the guy is. I think it's a flight to the fore in view of serious problems at home. His regime is questioned in the big cities, hit by the youth. His regime has serious economic problems, not only because of the downfall of the energy prices, but that plays a big role, but also generally, they are not modernizing. They are incapable of modernizing their economy, the Russians. This is why the Soviet Union fell down, and now you have the same phenomenon. And they cannot afford to see the Ukraine become a model like Poland and the Baltic countries. This is why they invaded also. So I see in all this a kind of weakness in internal politics and economics, and therefore a flight to the fore in order to compensate and give the Russian people, who 80% are living in the countryside and only see the controlled TV programs, I mean, and they think it's great how he's showing the world how tough he is. And he's making, I just heard yesterday, military speeches threatening with atomic weapons. He's half, if he would believe in what he's saying, I would have to say he's half crazy, but he doesn't believe in it, of course. He's a KGB man, and he plays this. And one should simply, and Obama doesn't react even. He doesn't care about it. On the other hand, he is not from my point of view, one has to think a little bit also the way Putin thinks. One has to put oneself into his skin. And he wants to be recognized as a partner. And why not giving him this damn satisfaction? Why not? I wouldn't be, we at least are not so, we have always dealt with the Russians in difficult ways. And we know them. And Angela Merkel, coming from East Germany, knows them particularly well. It has a fairly good relationship with Putin. So we might even be able to exploit that and help bring about something now, since we have finished the major job on the financial crisis, since there is, for the time being, the stalemate, frozen conflict situation in Ukraine. We will now concentrate, also because of the refugee issue, on Syria, and will try to do our best together with the other partners. And that includes Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, and what have you, and Turkey. Yeah? It's very interesting what we are doing with Turkey now. I've always been against the way we have treated over the last 10 years Turkey, and have been criticized for that, because I always have seen Turkey also in geostrategic terms. And now it works. We're coming together again. There's also, by the way, something to do with the fact that Turkey doesn't get along with all the wonderful ideas they developed to have closer relationship with Russia, with the Arab world. It's all not working so well. So the only option also, as far as I see it for Turkey, is Europe. And we should also realize that without Turkey, we have there an open flank. This is not sufficiently protecting us. We need also the Turks. And of course, we need Egypt as a stabilizing factor in your region. And we have the problem of your neighbor, Libya. There we Germans refused to join when we overthrew Gaddafi. We thought that was not well thought through. I admit at that time I criticized my government for that. I was in favor of showing solidarity with our partners. I'm no longer that sure that it was a wise thing on my part at that time. And now we have to try urgently to stabilize Libya. And I don't know whether the two governments trying to come together, whether that's going to work. I have my doubts. Hopefully it works, but I'm not sure. Because basically all the refugees, or too many refugees, are coming through there, and it's a dangerous thing. It's also destabilizing. It's causing troubles for you. It's causing troubles for Tunisia. It's for us, and it's, by the way, played a role by our decision to help Greece. We thought, gosh, a failing state in Libya, and now, and pretty soon, a failing state in Greece. Where do we end up? And we had all these kind of considerations also on our mind. Okay, so no perfect answer, huh? But a long one.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm very glad that you mentioned a brief of history. I'm here.
Oh yeah, there you are.
I'm very glad that you mentioned a brief of history and issue and global actors between Russian and American, but I'm opposite, my friend. EU is in the middle and have a great role in the solving crisis, particularly in the Middle East. And I seen that many refugees come to the Europe as a humanitarian ground, and they supporting refugees, and they supporting Middle East. My question is, what is the strategic of the EU in the Middle East? Do you think the new Middle East is needed, or reshaping new Middle East is necessary for the solving crisis for the future? And what is the strategic of the EU to establishing some state in the Middle East?
Oh gosh, I wonder, I'm not in Brussels. What our priority is to reduce the influx of refugees. We want to survive. And we cannot do it simply by paying the Turks to close the border. I mean, you have to go at the root. And that means some kind of truce peace, or secure zones where Syrians can live, and from the refugee camps they can return. Now, whether that means preferably a kind of re-emergence of Syria, but if not only partially, well then partially, but without military conflict, so that we can develop the country or the countries, and have people stay there and return. So we need peace and some kind of stability, whether under a UN regime with UN troops there for an intermediate period, who knows? One can imagine all kinds of things. But this is very difficult to say because there's Assad. For us, he should go. The faster, the quicker, the better. But if Russia insists for its own interests, okay, we might find a compromise. That he first stays in and then leaves after an election. And if that election is an objective one, he will go. If it's not objective, he will stay. Okay. But at least we need a kind of peaceful, stable, quasi-stable order, so that the refugees don't come anymore, and that with humanitarian aid we can help these people to find in their old homeland a new home again. I think we don't expect more, because we have to take into account Iranian interests, Saudi Arabian interests, Turkish interests. This thing with the Kurds it's so messy. It's very difficult even for a European pro-Turk to understand what's going on there in the mind of an Erdogan. And so we have limited objects, but it's supposed to bring a sort of peace order again. And then the rest remains to be seen. It has to be sorted out. We don't know yet. We don't have, maybe some experts who know the region better. I'm not an expert on this. So all I can say is that we have this general approach. And probably on that general approach, we might find ample support. In the end, I don't think Russia has a real interest in keeping the conflict going. They are interested in keeping their military bases there and to show that they are a global power and on level with the United States. But otherwise, they have also problems in their own backyard with Islamic extremism. And so they would also like to have it quieted down. So that is, and with Iran, it's ambiguous, but I think it's not a hopeless case either. Saudi Arabia, more difficult to say. They are a little bit complicated to understand with their religious things. But I think on the whole, there is a chance that we can somehow pacify the region. There is a chance. Whether it's likely to happen, I don't know. I can't give you anything concrete. I only know that we have to make efforts. It's very tedious. But I see indications that most of the participants are trying to work in that direction, carefully, slowly, but I don't consider it as hopeless, all I can say. You are closer by. You are having more doubts, huh?
Having more doubts.
Yes.
The deal with Iran changes all the time. The Saudis, countries now are willing to chase
Yes, I see an Egyptian with doubts, and I have also mine, but we Germans are in such a situation that we have to allow ourselves to get carried away by positive hopes. We can't give up, and we hope to be able to count on you supporting us. Yeah, we have a very positive relationship with you, and we want to bring something about that helps you and all of us. Whether that works remains to be seen.
Thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful presentation. Dear ladies and gentlemen, please join me for one again to tell them. Thank you.